Peter, Congressman Davidson, thank you both so much for joining me today. We're here to talk about a lot of different things, but first, I kind of want to talk about the cypherpunk movement. Peter, you were one of the early contributors to the Bitcoin protocol, and this year you had the distinct honor of being publicly accused of being Satoshi Nakamoto. Can you talk about what that was like when the cameras were rolling and that happened?
Well, I mean, you know, I've done a lot of stuff in my life that's gotten me in contact with journalists, so that was just yet another silly media circus. But, you know, I think, like, this whole focus on, you know, who is Satoshi, of course, it comes from outsiders. It comes from people who aren't really involved in Bitcoin. And what's interesting there is, you got to remember, the thing that makes Bitcoin interesting is that the question, who is Satoshi, is irrelevant. Bitcoin is a decentralized system. Satoshi doesn't have an off switch. I don't have an off switch. No one has an off switch. You know, what's so important is that it's a protocol, a piece of software, where the creator's identity just doesn't matter. And, you know, I'm sitting on the stage as being like some guy who contributed early, but in many respects, I mean, I'm no more or less special than anyone else who contributed early on, because Bitcoin is just a protocol.
I think you said we're all Satoshi, right, in the documentary?
Well, Craig Wright isn't, and that's being litigated in UK court. But other than Craig Wright, we're all Satoshi.
Right. And Congressman Davidson, I learned this yesterday, actually. You have the Cypherpunk Manifesto framed in your office, is that right?
That's true.
Can you talk a little bit about why you were inspired by the cypherpunk movement?
Well, I mean, I didn't necessarily know who Eric Hughes was, who was the drafter of it. I didn't know, I went to West Point, so in '93 when that was drafted, I was not focused on this movement at all. I was, very focused on something else. But the ideas behind it are the same ideas and values, in my view, that shaped our country. And it literally is why America fought the revolution, that we're, our rights are natural rights. They're not granted by government, and they're not able to be taken away by government without due process and for cause. And one of the most basic rights here, the privacy right that they're talking about, is fundamental in speech, and it's also fundamental in the ability to transact. The government doesn't give you the ability to transact. They've interjected themselves into private transactions. And I think the wisdom of people, even as the internet was forming, to say, if we don't protect privacy, there really is no way for the future to be the way that it has been. And you've seen the digital age basically become the surveillance age today. And why? Because they can. And the beautiful thing about Bitcoin in particular, and some of the other protocols, is it does provide some level of privacy, not pure secrecy, it's on a blockchain, but it is a layer of privacy that I think is, the epitome of what the cypherpunk movement set in motion and ultimately was encapsulated in the Bitcoin white paper and other protocols.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's nothing more American than the right to privacy, right? Peter, trustless is a term often used in crypto discussions. What does that mean from an actual technical perspective, and why is it such a fundamental aspect of a decentralized system?
Well, I think it really comes down to the fact that if a system is decentralized, that implies that there isn't a central point of failure there. And immediately, that brings in a notion of trustlessness. If the system is going to work at all, if it's to be that type of system, you cannot have trust in other people. Now, certainly in practice, there's degrees of trust. I mean, a good example is, I have my phone here. Do I really control every single aspect of every single piece of software and a piece of silicon on the phone? No. But making assumptions that, yes, my phone should do what it's supposed to do, I can absolutely run a trustless wallet on there because that software does what it wants to do under my control. It's not going through someone else. And, you bring up an example about rights, and freedom of speech, of course, is a very famous one in the US. And, of course, I'm Canadian. We had a very good example of the abridgment of this during COVID, when, quite famously, the Canadian government went and arbitrarily seized people's bank accounts purely for being against their policies. And why could they do that? Well, because the financial system is trusting other people. Now, fortunately, Canada still has physical cash, and we have Bitcoin and so on. So there are some recourse to this. But imagine a world where everything's going through credit cards, which is true in many countries. You're screwed. You really have no ability to exercise your freedoms without the ability to participate in the economy.
The cypherpunk movement, was all about, protecting personal liberties and freedoms on the internet. But when we talk about these things, it often comes down to hyper technicalities. Congressman, have you had trouble, explaining some of this stuff to, your colleagues on the Hill? I know at the Digital Chamber, that's one of the things we've been fighting for the last 10 years, helping them understand the technology.
Yeah, we've done some great member education over the years. We've had some, sharp people from the industry come in and do member days where people, are literally, no idea what the difference is between Bitcoin and Ethereum, and what do they mean by crypto, what do they mean by cryptocurrency. And, you think, the cypherpunk movement was inherently technical, and, cypherpunks write code, right? And I kind of think, well, not necessarily. Sometimes now cypherpunks run nodes. Would be a good play on that today. But today, people don't even need to know that. But they're participating in this movement. And some people really get into the tech part of it. And most people, it's the same kind of thing as the internet. They don't need to understand the 7-layer protocol or any of that. They never wasted time, thankfully, in Congress trying to understand that, because it's clear now most people don't. But nevertheless, in 1996, they passed the Telecommunications Act that really laid the groundwork for that innovation to flourish in the United States. And frankly, I think a lot of the incumbents that were disrupted by that in the 90s learned from it, and they've lobbied like crazy to try to kill this movement. And Elizabeth Warren became the nexus of that. She populated a lot of the financial services positions because of the advice and consent role of the Senate. And she populated these people with activists that were literally blocking the development of this tech. Maybe the biggest beneficiary has been capital flowed more rapidly to AI than it otherwise would have, but the amount of damage done to this space and the innovation in this space in the United States of America is hard to put a number on. And I think it's encouraging to so many people that in this campaign you saw kind of a different coalition form that wasn't necessarily your traditional Republican coalition that got behind Donald Trump. Some of it wasn't even because of Donald Trump, it was because of the kind of connections he built. You look at David Sachs hosting an event in Silicon Valley. Elon Musk wasn't even behind Donald Trump before David Sachs led the way there. So you look at what has happened in the last 12 months in this space, it inherently realized that politics is becoming the barrier to growth and innovation in the United States. And it's an old saying, you can ignore politics, but that doesn't mean politics will ignore you. And people found that. They were being debanked, they were being shut down and shut out of the market, and now they're going to be ignored no longer.
I gotta say, I always go push back on people really harping on the cypherpunks to write code kind of ethos, precisely because you can't actually ignore politics. Like it or not, government's very powerful, and you need to do both.
Just for the record, every year we invite Elizabeth Warren to come speak, and so far she has not accepted our invitation. I don't know why. I think this is for both of you. What is, I guess, the biggest misconception that will need to be overcome to increase adoption? I ask this because our whole mission statement at the Digital Chamber is to increase adoption of the technology. That's what we want to see happen. In your day-to-day, what is the number one thing that keeps coming up?
I mean, I'll go speak about it this from a point of view of Bitcoin specifically, and I think a lot of people just have never actually tried using reasonable ways to go use it. This might not be the right audience to go say, but I wonder how many people have, for instance, used a Lightning wallet. And that's sort of the question of, well, that's the easiest way to go use Bitcoin. Although, of course, annoyingly, the best Lightning wallets out there, Phoenix is a good example, you can't actually install it from US app stores because the wallet developers are scared off by the US regulatory system. Now, I certainly hope that with the current administration, that might go change, but things have to go change first before we get access to some of this better software.
Yeah, I think the hard thing for members of Congress, even Ro Khanna from Silicon Valley, this probably isn't a top 10 issue amongst constituents in a congressional district. And when you talk to regular people that we all represent, they don't really differentiate between, Bitcoin and central bank digital currency. And they're 180 degrees apart, right? They just think, oh, digital money, that's what you're talking about. And central bank digital currency is very unpopular with the public. And I think a lot of people fear that any path to do any kind of regulatory safe space for crypto or Bitcoin or self-custody or anything else becomes a gateway to central bank digital currency. And we aggressively want to stop that. Unfortunately, that's an issue that breaks on party lines. And privacy doesn't. So we've built this coalition on privacy that is conservatives and progressives, people that essentially, I've said for a long time, like, it doesn't truly break on party lines normally because, like the Patriot Act has Republicans and Democrats that want to spy on everybody, maybe for different reasons, but it also has Republicans and Democrats that really don't want the government spying on them or anyone else because they know that, well, it might spy on me next, and I don't think the government needs to have that kind of power. So we've built a great coalition there, but for some reason it breaks down when we get to central bank digital currency, and it is the ultimate surveillance tool. And, as we were just talking in Canada, if the government has central control of the money, they truly could keep everyone safe. They truly could filter out all the illicit finance. They could find all the bad guys. And in America, we recognize that, and it's really a Third Amendment issue. It's not just privacy, it's the government can't camp out. Well, the government's camped out in everything you have, from your phone to your car to your browser, and they want to be embedded into everything you do with money transactions, including denying you the ability to custody your own assets. It is my money, and they want to basically have you register to get permission to have a wallet, or really a signing device, because the money isn't really stored inside the wallet, so I wish we called them signing devices, but it doesn't flow off the tongue quite as well. But the cryptography behind the signing device, they want to say, well, if you get permission from the government and you register it, we could let you have one of these things. And that is a complete corruption of our system of government in the United States of America.
It's a good segue. Can you talk a little bit about the Keep Your Coins Act?
Well, the reason that we introduced it was because FinCEN, our Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, part of the Treasury Department, had kind of worked on rules going back to the Obama administration, trying to limit self-custody or require reporting if you did custody crypto. They added some language on the tax form that says, did you basically do any crypto transactions this year? And to kind of flag for audit trails or further criminalize the tax code. That's why we initially started working on it. And it really got a lot of attention when the Canadian trucker strike was happening. And that's around the time that we first really codified it into a standalone bill. It's been part of the spirit of what we've been working on for a while. But that's why we've created it as a standalone bill. And frankly, last year, there was really a much more robust language in FIT 21, the market structure bill, and it was watered down because self-custody has now broken on party line issues. And it was stripped from the stablecoin bill last Congress in order to get some Democrats on board with it. Well, now the coalition's different, and Republicans don't necessarily have to negotiate against ourselves. And as we're working on stablecoin language right now, we don't really have strong protections for self-custody. And without that, I mean, it's really not a complete bill. It's not truly a bill for consumers. And if you don't protect self-custody, this is the real litmus test for elected officials. There is no DeFi. I mean, you can't have DeFi. Everything else is just account-based. I mean, it's interesting because you get new companies to manage the accounts and there's new branding on it, but it's essentially the same architecture. It's not even that interesting unless you have self-custody, because then you can do permissionless peer-to-peer transactions, then you can eliminate intermediaries, then you can actually have DeFi. And fundamentally, that is the sort of bipartisan consensus that goes unstated. A lot of people don't want that future, and they're working to undermine it. And they will say things like, well, if we had digital ID, and that really is just a way to embed in the surveillance state and flip our government on its head and say the government will grant you permission or revoke permission to transact, which is crazy.
We are going to have a whole panel on the Keep Your Coins Act later this afternoon on one of the other stages, so if you guys want to learn more, definitely check that out. Peter, we're almost running out of time here, but I wanted to ask you, you come from such an interesting movement, right, in history, especially for this technology. I don't know that I could have even predicted where we would be at this juncture, so just a fun question here. 5, 10 years from now, where do you think this technology will be? Where do you think we're going to be?
Well, I hope things like the Self-Custody Act get passed. Woo-hoo. And this I think is a really critical question. There's two ways this goes. One way is essentially an extension of the Visa, MasterCard regime, if you will. People talk about central bank digital currencies a lot, but I always like to point out we basically have that. When you use your Visa and MasterCard, all those transactions go to a central place, and they're all easy to surveil. They're all easy to control. The tech under the hood being different in terms of accounting, that's not really that important. What matters is centralization. On the other hand, there's other way this goes, which is the barriers to wider use go down, and then the use goes up. Now, from sort of a Bitcoin point of view, I'd say that the technology is ready to much greater adoption. Things like the Lightning Network work really well. There's all kinds of other improvements you can go do. But in this audience, that's just tech details. That's not the important thing. The important thing is finding a way to go set the legal framework so this is doable. Like I said before, you need wallets like Phoenix to feel comfortable providing their software to US people. It's crazy that this is even a question. It's just software. Yet they don't feel comfortable doing that. And I want to go see that change.
Thank you. Congressman, do you want to answer that question too? 5, 10 years from now?
No, I think that's exactly where the future holds is what's illegal. And you have this regime that basically says the government's the giver of your rights. And there's also this idea that you can put all the burden onto the private sector. And know your customer rules currently make the relationship direct with the provider. So like if you've got Kraken or Coinbase or something, they have to comply with know your customer provisions just like a bank would have to. They have to know who they're doing business with. But they don't necessarily have to know who their customers do business with. And kind of because it's technologically feasible on a blockchain structure, there's a regulatory framework that wants to follow everywhere, and somehow that becomes the initial relationship's responsibility to follow their customers in every single thing they do. And that's a pretty dystopian future. And frankly, all the dystopian fictions, including the Book of Revelation, which I consider scripture, and billions of other people do too, that's what the future holds someday. But it's always depicted as evil. So in our time, let us resist it, right? So hopefully we can hold that future off.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you.